There's a point in your journey when you realize silence is not weakness, it's power. It's not the absence of voice, it's the presence of strength. When someone hurts you, disrespects you, or plays games with your emotions, your first instinct might be to explain, to argue, to react. But the real transformation begins when you understand that your silence is the loudest answer you can ever give. See, when you stop speaking, when you don't pick up that phone, when you don't send that message, when you choose stillness over chaos, you're not avoiding the situation, you're owning it. You're showing the world, and more importantly, yourself, that you don't have to prove your worth through words. You've already proven it by walking away, because silence is clarity. Silence is peace. Silence is the moment you say, I've said enough, now I choose me. People expect noise. They expect you to plead, to beg, to explain. And when you don't, that's when the shift happens. That's when they begin to feel what you once felt. The emptiness, the wondering, the aching, the realization that you were not the one who needed them. They were the one who needed your presence, your love, your fire. And now they're left alone with the cold echo of what used to be. You don't owe anyone an explanation for your healing. Let them wonder why you went quiet. Let them replay every word they said, trying to figure out which one pushed you away. Let them feel the silence that you endured in their inconsistency. And you take that silence and turn it into your sanctuary. Let it become your space to rise. Because when you stop responding to disrespect, you start responding to your value. When you stop chasing, you start attracting better. When you stop speaking, you start hearing the voice inside you that says, I deserve more. So no, silence is not weakness, it's wisdom. It's the language of a healed soul. And in that stillness, in that quiet revolution of self-respect, you don't need closure. You don't need answers. You don't even need them to understand. You just need to remember, silence is a decision, and it's the first sign that you're finally free. It's a strange thing, isn't it? How someone can feel your absence louder than your presence. When you finally stop texting first, when you stop checking in, when you stop fighting to be seen, suddenly the world shifts. They start to notice, not because you said something, but because you said nothing. You see, there's a power in not showing up where you're not valued. It's not about ego. It's not about games. It's about self-preservation. When you remove your energy from a place where it was being drained, when you stop lighting someone else's fire while your own is burning out, that silence speaks in ways your words never could. Let me tell you what happens next. At first, they don't notice. They're too busy, too distracted, too confident you'll always be there. But then a day passes, then another, and another, and suddenly the phone doesn't buzz the same, the room doesn't feel as full, the mirror doesn't reflect the same power they felt when you were standing by their side. And then it hits them. It's not just a silence. They're feeling your absence like gravity. That emptiness, that's not an accident. That's the space you used to fill. That's the warmth of your presence now replaced with a quiet reminder. You're not obligated to stay where you're not appreciated. Because when you stay silent, what you're really doing is protecting your peace. You're reclaiming your energy. You're saying, I am no longer available to be misunderstood, overlooked, or taken for granted. And that decision, it shakes them. Because they thought you'd never stop showing up. They thought you'd always be available, always reachable, always chasing. But silence, that's the shift. That's when they realize they don't have the access they once took for granted. This is not about revenge. It's about revelation. Silence reveals who was really there for you and who was only there for the convenience of your presence. And I'll tell you something else. When you stop reaching out, when you stop initiating, you'll be surprised how quiet things get. That silence, that's not just yours. It exposes their effort or lack of it. And in that space, you'll see the truth. Maybe you were the glue holding it all together. Maybe you were the heartbeat they never acknowledged. But now you're choosing stillness over struggle, peace over performance. And trust me, that decision, it echoes. It shakes the ground they walk on. So don't fear the silence, embrace it. Because in that quiet, you're becoming the version of yourself who no longer begs to be heard because you've learned how to listen to yourself instead. There's something unshakable about a person who finally chooses to walk away without slamming the door. No drama, no loud exit, just quiet strength. You see, when you stay silent and pull back your presence, it forces the other person to face something they've probably been avoiding all along. Their own reflection, without your energy holding them up. They start to feel the emptiness, not because you're punishing them, but because your absence uncovers the illusion. It reveals the truth of how much weight you carried in the connection. Maybe they thought it was balanced. Maybe they thought you needed them more than they needed you. But now, with no words, no explanations, just silence, you've become the mirror they can't escape. And that silence, it becomes their reckoning. Because what they don't realize right away is that your silence was never empty. It's full of lessons, full of strength, full of boundaries. It's full of all the things you tolerated when you were still trying to make it work. You weren't just being quiet, you were protecting your heart, your peace, your dignity. At first, they may act like they don't care, like your absence is a gift, like life goes on. But deep down, there's a shift, and it grows, because they're not just missing your voice, they're missing your presence, your consistency, your ability to show up, even when it was hard. They're missing the way you made everything feel possible, the way you brought clarity to chaos, peace to tension, and light into their dark. Eventually, they begin to sit with questions they never asked before. Why did they stop calling? Why did they fall back? Did I lose them? And with every unanswered question, they feel the gravity of your silence. That's when they start to crumble. Not because you attack them, but because they finally feel what it's like without you holding things together. And maybe they come back. Maybe they send that message, make that call, try to explain. But this time, you're not desperate for closure. You're not waiting for validation. Because your silence wasn't a cry for attention. It was a sign that you've already healed in places they still haven't touched. So if you're in that space right now, quiet, steady, withdrawn, know this: that stillness is not weakness, it's power, it's maturity. It's a declaration that you're done explaining yourself to people who never really listened in the first place. You're no longer proving your worth to someone who refused to see it when you were at your loudest. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is nothing at all, because in the end, the right people won't need to hear your silence to know your value. They would have felt it all along. There's a point in your life when you stop arguing with people who already made up their minds about you. You stop over-explaining, you stop chasing closure, and that's when your silence becomes louder than anything you've ever said. You don't pull away to play games, you pull away because you finally realized your peace is worth more than forcing someone to see your value. See, when someone notices you've gone quiet, when you're no longer reacting, no longer explaining yourself, no longer reaching out like you used to, it shakes them. Not immediately, but eventually, because you're no longer a predictable part of their world. You're no longer the one holding the conversation, the connection, the relationship together. And when you remove that energy, that presence, it starts to feel real, uncomfortably real. It's not that you suddenly became cold, it's that you grew up. You learn that some people only listen to silence. Some people only notice your worth when you're no longer within reach. And it's sad, but it's also liberating. Because the moment you stop trying to convince someone that you matter, that you care, that you're worthy of the same energy you've been giving, that's the moment you start walking in your own power. And here's the part nobody tells you. Your silence isn't just affecting them. It's building something in you too. It's making you stronger. It's helping you see how many times you compromised your own needs just to make someone else feel comfortable. You begin to recognize how much emotional labor you were doing, how much space you made for someone who never truly made space for you. That distance, that silence becomes your sanctuary. It gives you time to reflect, to heal, to ask yourself the hard questions. Why was I so afraid to let go? Why did I feel responsible for their growth? And little by little, you begin to realize this isn't punishment. This is alignment. This is what it feels like to stop shrinking yourself for people who only like the version of you they could control. You don't have to announce your growth. You don't have to perform your healing. Sometimes the best thing you can do is let your silence speak for you. Let it tell the story of a person who gave too much, stayed too long, and finally chose themselves. Not out of spite, not out of bitterness, but out of deep, unwavering love. For peace, for clarity, and for a life that no longer depends on who stays and who goes. So stay silent if you must, not because you're weak, but because you're wise enough to know that not every situation deserves your voice. Some just deserve your distance. There's something powerful about not responding, not reacting, not explaining. It confuses people who are used to you always being available, always being the one who clears the air, makes peace, bridges the distance. But when you stop doing that, when you choose silence instead, it becomes unsettling to them, especially when they know deep down they did something wrong. They expect you to reach out like you always do, to fix things again like you always have. And when you don't, when you let the silence hang there, it forces them to sit in what they've created. You see, silence doesn't mean you're weak. It doesn't mean you don't care. It means you've matured. You've evolved. You've come to a point in your life where protecting your peace is more important than proving a point. Silence becomes your boundary. A boundary that says, I'm no longer explaining myself to people who don't value me. I'm no longer begging for the bare minimum. I'm not continuing a conversation with someone who left me on red emotionally for months. That silence, it's loud. Loud enough for someone to finally hear their own actions echoing back at them. Loud enough for someone to finally feel the absence of what they took for granted. That silence reminds them who you were, what you gave, and how easy they were to overlook it all. They start remembering the messages they ignored, the calls they didn't return, the moments they brushed you off. It all starts to hit when the energy shifts, and they're no longer the one being chased. Let me tell you, when someone knows they messed up and you give them nothing but silence, it becomes unbearable because now they're sitting with it. Now they're left to wrestle with the version of you that no longer needs them to understand. You're not angry, you're just done. You've moved from trying to be heard to choosing not to speak. And that transition, that's what makes them crumble. Because silence holds up a mirror, and most people aren't ready to face their reflection. What you need to understand is this: the moment you go quiet, people start hearing themselves. They begin to feel every moment they thought you'd always be there. They feel your absence in ways your words could never express. Your silence starts working on them slowly, deeply, relentlessly. It's not revenge. It's not manipulation. It's a natural reaction to emotional neglect. So no, you're not being distant. You're not playing games. You're simply healing in private, growing in peace, and no longer inviting people into your space who only showed up to disrupt it. They'll remember you, not because you yelled, cried, or argued, but because when you stopped responding, they finally started listening. There's a quiet strength in letting someone feel the consequences of losing you, not out of revenge, but out of respect for yourself. Too often, we try to cushion others from the impact of their choices. We leave the door slightly cracked, hoping they'll come back changed. We answer texts we shouldn't, reply to calls that should go unanswered, and keep one foot in the past because we're afraid of fully letting go. But the truth is, healing starts when you stop interrupting someone's lesson. Some people only begin to change when they lose access to you, when they finally realize you're not going to be around forever, when they wake up one day and recognize that your silence wasn't passive, it was powerful. That's when the lesson begins. You weren't just another person in their life. You were their mirror, their support, their calm, and now that you're gone, they're forced to live without what they took for granted. You must understand, growth rarely comes through comfort. Sometimes people need to lose a good thing to recognize what it meant. Your absence becomes the catalyst. Your boundaries, your silence, your distance, it all forces them to reflect. And yes, it's painful for them, but it's also necessary, because without the loss, there's no space for them to realize how deeply they mishandled you. And while they're learning, you're healing. While they're reflecting, you're rebuilding. You're rediscovering your worth, not based on who wants you back, but based on the peace you feel when you no longer have to chase validation. You're learning to sit in your own presence and know that's enough. You're learning to be loved by you first, and that shift, that's where your power lies. Letting them feel the loss doesn't mean you don't care. It means you finally care enough about yourself to stop lowering your standards to meet someone else's inconsistency. It means you're allowing space for both of you to grow separately. And whether or not they return, whether or not they realize it too late, you've done your part. You loved fully, you showed up completely, and when the time came, you let go gracefully. So don't be afraid to walk away and let them feel your absence. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the silence that follows your departure, because in that silence, they'll meet themselves. And that meeting, it will change them far more than your presence ever could. One of the hardest truths you will ever have to accept is this: some people only realize your value when your silence echoes louder than your presence ever did. And it's not because you weren't good to them. In fact, it's the opposite. You were too understanding, too forgiving, too available. You poured into someone who never once thought the well could run dry. They believed you would always be there, until one day you weren't. You see, when you stop explaining yourself, when you stop begging them to hear you, when you stop asking for the bare minimum of respect, that's when something shifts. They no longer have access to the soft version of you, the version that tolerated being overlooked, the version that tried to fix everything by overextending, the version that gave even when empty. You stop responding, and suddenly they're forced to sit with themselves. It's in that silence where they begin to hear the truth you used to say out loud. They remember your words. They recall the way you made them feel, safe, seen, steady. They try to fill the void with noise, with distractions, with temporary replacements, but nothing sticks because nothing feels like you. You were real, you were rare, you were rooted in love, not ego. And that's the kind of energy that lingers. It haunts them, not to punish, but to remind them that losing someone like you has consequences. Don't get confused. Your silence is not weakness. It's your evolution. It's you reclaiming your peace. It's you choosing not to be pulled back into a cycle of emotional chaos. When you go silent, it's not out of spite, it's out of self-respect. because you've realized that trying to explain your worth to someone who doesn't value you is draining. You've learned that peace feels better than proving a point. And sometimes the most powerful move is to remove yourself entirely. And in that space you leave behind, they begin to feel it, the loss, the regret, the weight of their own decisions. They remember the conversations you had, the moments you held them up, the times you showed up when no one else did. They realize that you weren't just another person. They realize you were the one who held it all together. But by then, you're no longer standing still. You're growing, you're glowing, you're grounded. You're not waiting for them to notice. You've already turned the page. You're building a life that doesn't depend on someone else's recognition of your value. Because your silence wasn't just the absence of words, it was the presence of healing. So let your silence speak for you. Let it be the reminder that you will never again settle for being half loved. And if they finally understand what they lost, let them. But don't go back, because you've already moved forward. There comes a moment in every strong person's life when they realize they don't need to chase closure. They don't need a final conversation, a long explanation, or even an apology. They understand that healing doesn't come from someone else's mouth. It comes from their own decision to stop bleeding for someone who never intended to stop wounding them. And this is where the shift begins. This is where power quietly returns. Because when you choose not to react, when you stop reaching for answers that may never come, you take your power back. Not in noise, but in stillness. You see, silence isn't passive, it's powerful. It's not about ignoring someone to punish them. It's about choosing peace over drama. It's about setting a boundary that says, I'm no longer available for chaos. People who once played with your emotions will start to feel unsettled by your silence because they're used to controlling the narrative. They're used to pushing your buttons and watching you unravel. But when you don't react, when you stop explaining, you take away their power to manipulate. Let me be clear. This is not about becoming cold. It's about becoming clear. Clear on your worth. Clear on your standards. Clear on the kind of energy you're no longer willing to tolerate. Because silence is often misunderstood as weakness, but in truth, it is the most refined form of strength. It takes discipline to not clap back. It takes maturity to walk away without turning it into a show. And it takes wisdom to know when your voice is being wasted. When you let go without noise, people start hearing everything they never listened to when you were still speaking. They play old messages, reread your words, replay old memories trying to find where it went wrong. But it's never just one moment. It's the accumulation of disregard, the casual betrayals, the subtle dismissals. And when someone finally has to sit with the fact that they were the reason for your silence, that's when the real reckoning begins. They crumble, not because you hurt them, but because you stopped allowing them to hurt you. And by the time they want to explain, you no longer need answers. You've already outgrown the version of you that was willing to beg for clarity. You've evolved past the need for closure from someone who wasn't even open to understanding when they had the chance. And that growth, that peace, that grounded energy, it speaks volumes. It makes them wish they had treated you better when they had you, because now you are unreachable. Not out of cruelty, but out of clarity. You don't need to shout your worth to be heard. You don't need to prove you were good. You were always enough. And now that you've chosen to walk in silence, let that silence speak your truth louder than any words ever could. There's a part of healing most people don't talk about. It's the moment you realize you could get even, but you don't. You could expose everything they did, but you stay quiet. You could burn the bridge and light a match with your truth, but instead, you walk away holding your peace. That's real strength. That's the kind of growth that doesn't need a stage or an audience. It's quiet, but it's powerful. Because when you start to heal, you stop needing revenge. You stop needing to prove your pain. You stop needing them to admit what they did. Why? Because your healing no longer depends on their honesty. It rests entirely on your decision to move forward. You begin to understand that revenge is a distraction, that bitterness ties you to what broke you. And every time you revisit the betrayal, every time you replay the disrespect, you give it permission to keep wounding you. But when you choose peace, when you rise above the urge to get even, you step into a different kind of power, the power of detachment, the power of self-respect, the power of peace that doesn't need to shout. Some people will try to pull you back into the chaos just to keep you small. They will poke and prod and try to provoke you because that's how they maintain control. They thrive when you lose your composure. But when you don't react, when you no longer give them that access, it shakes them. It forces them to sit with the weight of their own behavior. And maybe for the first time, they have to see themselves without the benefit of your forgiveness cushioning their conscience. Letting go of revenge doesn't mean you weren't hurt. It means you decided not to carry that hurt into your future. It means you chose to break the cycle rather than participate in it. Because nothing is more powerful than walking away from what tried to break you without bitterness in your heart. That kind of peace is rare. That kind of power is untouchable. When you stop looking for ways to hurt them back, you start creating space for your own healing. And that's the real win. That's the victory. When your future matters more than your pain, when your peace becomes louder than your need for justice, when you realize that the most powerful response is no response at all, and you live your life in such a way that you never have to explain what they lost. They'll feel it. They'll see it. And you'll be too far ahead to even look back. There comes a time in life when silence becomes your greatest strength, when choosing not to respond is the most powerful thing you can do. It's not about weakness or avoidance. It's about wisdom. It's about understanding that some battles aren't worth fighting and some words aren't worth saying. You might feel the urge to react, to defend yourself, to explain your side of the story, but every time you do, you give energy to the very thing that's trying to pull you down. You feed the fire instead of letting it die out. When you stay silent, you create space. Space for clarity, for healing, for growth. You take control of your emotions instead of letting others control them for you. It's like water. It can either flood the room or flow gently around obstacles. Choosing silence is choosing to flow. It's the pause before the storm settles. It's the moment you decide that your peace is more important than proving a point. You don't owe anyone an explanation for why you step back. You don't have to justify why you stopped engaging with toxic energy. Sometimes the best response is no response because it sends a louder message than any argument ever could. It says, I am bigger than this. I will not let this disturbance dictate my happiness. And when you live like that, you're untouchable. Letting silence do the work means you're confident enough to trust time and truth. You don't need to rush closure or validation from others. You know that what's meant for you will come in its own time, and what isn't will fall away quietly. That peace that comes from silence is not passive, it's active strength. It's a deliberate choice to protect your energy and focus on what truly matters. And when the person who tried to shake you finally crumbles, it won't be because you fought them, but because you refuse to engage. They will realize their tactics no longer work. They will feel the absence of your reaction like a void they cannot fill. That emptiness will force them to confront their own weaknesses. So after you stay silent and watch them crumble, what's next? The answer is simple. Rise. Rise higher than ever before. Use that energy you saved, that peace you protected, to rebuild, to grow, to become unstoppable. Let silence be your shield, your strength, and your catalyst for the life you are meant to live. This is not just about winning a battle, it's about winning your life.